Today, we're going to talk about the Festool TSC 55 KEB. Now, when you purchase any tool, you want to know what those acronyms mean. TSC means Track Saw Cordless or Cordless Track Saw, which means it has battery power. The 55 is in millimeters, and that's the depth of the cut, which is about 2 5/32, or as Festool advertises, 2 1/8 inch depth of cut at 90 degrees. The KEB stands for 3 different things. The K is for the Kickback Stop, which is right here, and you can turn it off for certain cuts. And it also has this sensor down here, and the blade, it detects when the blade actually stops or the RPMs drop, and it turns the blade off within milliseconds. The E stands for integrated electronics, or in this case, electronic speed control, which means sometimes you'll hear the saw sound like it's bogging down or speeding up, and that's actually the saw maintaining a constant speed RPM on the blade. So whether you speed up or slow down or encounter knots or something in the wood, the saw is constantly speeding up and down as it needs to keep a constant speed on the blade itself. That avoids burn marks and, overheating the blade, which dulls it, and all kinds of good stuff. The B stands for braking or electronic braking, and that means when you let go of the trigger, this thing stops within 2 seconds. So if the number 1 feature is the kickback stop, let's test it out. All right, I'm going to show you right here. The kickback stop is not illuminated. As soon as we turn the saw on, this will go green. And as soon as I lift the back of this up and the safety switch comes down, but the blade is still moving, it's going to start to flash yellow to alert us that the Kickback Protection is no longer there. I also want to show you really quick on the Kickback Protection and the brake. It does not work just when the saw comes off of the track or the table. You hear a lot of people say that, and that's not true. As soon as it lifts off the table, this will start to flash yellow, and the saw is going to keep running. For the kickback stop to actually kick in, the RPMs need to significantly drop on the blade itself. And I'll demonstrate that now by taking the saw and intentionally plunging it way too fast. So Festool has the same EC Tech brushless motor in the KEB as they did in the REB cordless, and this thing is absolutely amazing. And there was a couple issues with the old one where, it would slow down a little bit, and they fixed a lot of that by switching to an ultra thin kerf blade, just like the Makita. This is a 1.8 millimeter blade, and that thinner kerf blade has so much less resistance that Festool says this saw now has twice the power and twice the speed. Speaking of power, the saw comes with 2 batteries, and you can run it with just the bottom battery at half the speed or half the RPMs. When you install the top battery, you get full speed and full power, and you'll hear a dramatic difference. You can also dial down the power whether you have 1 or 2 batteries installed. Right beneath the 2 batteries here on the side of the saw, you can go from 1 all the way up to 6. They still kept all the same awesome features like the fast fix that allows us to lock the blade down in a certain position so that we can take it out. Also locks out the trigger so that we can't pull this even with the battery still installed. Now that our arbor bolt is in the window here, all we have to do is take the 5mm Allen wrench, and just about everything in Festool is 5mm, so remember that number. And we'll just go ahead and spin this bolt out of here. We'll take off our arbor washer, and notice it has 2 pins on there that line up with these spots right here when it goes back in. If you've ever done Makita, Milwaukee, DeWalt, any of those, and you have to try to hold down a button that locks the arbor and change the blade and put the bolt in and grab your wrench and all that, it's just annoying. So this is all set up, and all we've got to do is put our arbor washer back in here and put our bolt back in and tighten it down. All right, when we go to tighten this, it just has to be, snug, like finger tight, but you don't have to reef on these things. We'll put our hex wrench back in here, and we're ready to let the saw out of fast fix mode. So what I'm gonna do, and again, this is why I have the batteries out of the saw so I can show you this easy, but what we're gonna do is slide the saw forward and close the fast fix mode and let it back up slowly. So adjusting the depth is super easy. We just slide the depth stop here in towards the saw blade, and we can move it up or down. It also has a fine adjustment on here, which is mainly meant for reconditioned saw blades or reground, resharpened saw blades. And you just want to make sure that when you get a new blade installed in there, you set the 0 point, and then everything else will match up. The depth stop also has two different settings on it. This higher setting is the measurement with the track, and this lower setting is the one without the track. And the difference between these is the 5 millimeters. So just to prove to you, we have a 5 millimeter domino right here. We'll line it up with this green plastic on top, and there will be no light underneath the green plastic in the square and the domino in the square. As far as setting the bevel, there's a knob here on the front that we loosen up, and there's a knob on the back. And when we loosen those up, we can go from 0 to 45 degrees. If we want to go past 45 degrees, we just pull this little green button back here, and we can go to 46 or 47. And if we go back, it locks in, and it can only go to 45 again. On the other side here, if we want to get to 1 degree, we just go ahead and lift this green tab up, and the saw will slide into the 1 degree position, and this green bar stays raised right here. And when we go back past 0, it clicks, and now we can't get below 0. If you ever need to adjust the hard stop for 0, there's a little set screw right here in the other side of that same green lever at the bottom, and that controls the bevel stop when it hits the plate. So one thing I immediately noticed on this saw compared to the Makita, it only goes from -1 to 47 degrees. The Makita goes from -1 to 48 degrees. I don't know that that makes that big of a difference. The only time that I go past 45 degrees is I go somewhere between 45 and 46 degrees when I'm cutting a bevel, because when those two outside corners meet, I don't want there to be any gap on the outside of the miter where someone's going to see it. If there's going to be any gap at all, even microscopic, I want that to be on the inside where it's more hidden. Now most of the time you'll be using this on a track, but there is a cool feature on here. There's a 0 and a 45 degree mark to let you know where the blade is actually at 0 or 90 degrees and at 45 degrees. And there's a little dot right on each one of these to show you exactly where that blade is. A lot of the sight window and the splinter guard, which are on here, are unchanged, but you can loosen this up. You can bring the splinter guard down or back up if you want perfectly clean cuts. So the sight window is also adjustable, and I've seen a lot of people don't seem to know that. But when you slide this in, there's the initial click right here, which is all the way out. There's one more click in the middle right there, and then there's all the way in. So 0, 1, and 2. As far as going on the track, same exact thing. It has the green adjustments here for the cams underneath, and the cams tighten or loosen the pressure on this where it grabs the track. I've seen a lot of people say when your saw bogs down to like oil this whole thing and wipe it off clean and then oil your whole track, and that's not right. If you listen to Festool, Festool says if you're gonna apply the lubricant to anything, just inside of here, and then just on the portion of the track that this sits into, and you don't need to do anything else. Because the rest of this doesn't ride on the aluminum of the track, it actually rides on this high performance green plastic. It's a very special plastic that's very smooth and will never bind up with the saw. Now, fitting the saw to the track is actually pretty simple. I like to take the bottom battery out just because it makes it easier to get to this back adjustment cam right here. But all we have to do is, if these are loose and there's play in the saw, we just go ahead and tighten these down. And I like to tighten them all the way. Then there's no play, right? The saw's hard to push. Then I back them off just a little bit, turning them both the same amount, until I get the saw right where I like it. The goal is to be able to slide the saw easily, but not have any side-to-side play. So even though I have the new Festool track saw, I have the old tracks. And that was my own fault. I clicked a link from another creator, and I knew it was the right saw, and I didn't look close enough at the track. But obviously you can see that in the track here, it doesn't have the 3 holes that the new style track has. So I'm a little disappointed I got the old track, but it's not that big of a deal. I'll probably machine in those 3 spots that I need because of how handy they are and how it goes over the handle and the top of the sustainer. And also allows you to put the 2 mounting tabs in with the 2-sided tape on the back to use this thing on the wall to cut through sheetrock or other stuff. So one of the other things that comes with this kit, when you buy the KEB with the F plus FS, you're going to get a limit stop in there. And the limit stop is designed to go onto the track here. and this will lock into any position. So we can slide this anywhere down the track, and this little lip under here is going to catch on this back tab of the saw right here. So when you're talking about a saw that has kickback protection, how can you leave this out of the review, right? The limit stop is designed to prevent kickback. So if this is our starting point right here and this is tightened down, even if the saw tried to kick back, it really can't come up out of there. It can twist about this far, but it can't come off of the track. And if the track's clamped down, you're really protected from kickback. You can also put a limit stop at the end of your cut, and that'll allow you to go right from this point to that point and make repeatable cuts or super safe cuts. So another thing I learned from Sedge and Festool Live is in your track connectors or the rail connectors, install these at a different length, maybe a 1/2 inch or an inch apart, so that when you go to install it into the other track, it's a lot easier to find one index point and then find the other one after it instead of trying to line both of these up at the exact same time. Let me show you. All right, so we've got our 2 track sections here, and of course it'll be a lot harder on camera than it would be without it, but we line the first one up and the second one pretty much lines right up for us. There's no easier way to do that. Before you tighten any of this down, go ahead and set the saw on the track. Go just over that joint about halfway on each side of it, and then I'll tighten down the screws on the top side of this rail connector. And there, our saw slides perfectly over this. We'll just go ahead and carefully tip the rail up and tighten the bottom screws. Now our track is completely put together. So one thing I want to point out about the track is if you do connect tracks, it works great for the track saw itself, but when you go to use accessories, they're going to run into the top rail connector. So if you want to use both rail connectors and make sure you have a solid connection between them, you're not going to be able to use accessories like this or some of the fancy ones that click in here and hold your router and this acts as a straight edge. That stuff's going to give you trouble right here. And I think that's the case for getting a longer single piece track if you need to be able to, use those kind of accessories on an 8 or 9 foot board. You can even get this track up to 16 feet in a single piece. One other thing I like to show for all the Festool haters out there that say, oh, if you buy their saw, you need to buy their dust extractor, you need to buy their hoses, and a lot of that's not true. I love Festool. I have dominoes and sanders and track saws and tracks and clamps and all kinds of cool stuff, right? I still have a shop vac, so all I do is take 1 7/8" hose, and that goes right over the top of this. And if you actually want to get a nice fit that's not quite this tight, you can heat this up with a heat gun, slide it on there, let it cool, repeat that a couple times, and you can even burn these grooves into it so you can get the twist lock functionality. But in my case, I just push this on pretty tight. And sometimes it's easier to do if you just disconnect this from the saw itself, push it in here real tight, and then just go ahead and reconnect it onto here. So while Festool is an ecosystem of products that are designed to work really well together, and they do work fantastic, you don't necessarily need to buy all the components. And that's the best part of it. You can upgrade over time. Which brings me to how to buy the saw, or the best way to buy the saw too, right? Because you can buy just the saw. You can buy the saw and the batteries and the sustainer, or you can buy the F Plus FS, which gives you basically a discounted track when you buy it all together. But you have a lot of options. So if you already have a Festool cordless drill and you just want to try out the saw, you can do that with even just one battery. You can buy another battery later and buy track extensions later. It's a very flexible system. Now, the more pieces that you buy over time, the more you're going to love the system. Especially if you get into like MFT tables or the new miter guide that's coming out for this year. So they already make an angle stop for this that works fantastic to keep your rail at exactly 90 degrees from a reference edge. And it's back ordered right now as they're making this video for like another month or so. But in March of 2022, they're coming out with the heavy duty adjustable miter gauge. And it also has an extension to give you a longer reference edge. that's going to be a pretty awesome add-on to the system. So I'm not necessarily here to sell you a Festool. I love Festool myself because I've invested in the ecosystem and it works for me. I love the quality of it. I love the ergonomics of it. But you will find, other cordless track saws out there, right? And Makita and Festool are the two best in my opinion. I've heard the Bevel is also great. I've never tested one. Now, as much as I love Milwaukee cordless tools, they don't make one yet, but I would love to try it. I have seen the DeWalt and the Bosch used, in job sites, and they make some pretty rough cuts. I'm not a fan of those two. So when it comes right down to it, the Makita and the Festool have a lot of the same features. A lot of things Festool did in the new KEB model mirror what Makita had already done in the XPS 01 and 02. So that already has a ultra thin kerf blade. It's actually smaller than 1.8 millimeter by just a little bit, and I think that saw is a little bit faster. I do think you get a cleaner cut with the splinter guard on the saw and on the track in Festool. I don't know that it's a noticeable difference to many people, but to me it is. As far as the weight of the saw, they're the exact same weight, but the Makita feels different in your hand. It has this tendency to kind of tip down or tip forward, and I don't really like that. The Festool feels a little bit better balanced. But they both have high capacity Bluetooth batteries that will turn on Bluetooth dust collectors. They both have the electronic speed control, which keeps a constant speed on the blade. We talked about that earlier. They both have a hex wrench on board for the storage. The big differences though is the Makita doesn't have the Kickback Stop, and it doesn't have the quick lock on here that locks out the trigger and allows you to change the blade with just one hand. So like I always tell people, you have to live within your budget, and we all have one, and buy the best that you can afford and use it to the best of your ability, because most of it isn't the tool, most of it is learning how to use it properly. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but you can also buy battery adapters on Amazon. They're not sponsored by the tool companies. Obviously, they don't want you to have them, but for $20 or $30, if you go on Amazon, you can buy an adapter to put an M18 battery on a Makita or on a DeWalt, or vice versa, a DeWalt battery on a Milwaukee tool or Makita tool. That does work with the Makita track saw. I've used my M18 batteries on the XPS 02 with the adapters. I hope videos like this help you out. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to see more like it, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.